Well, how long until Britain's cost of living crisis becomes a Tory leadership crisis? Inflation's running at the highest rate for 40 years, viciously squeezing living standards. And at the same time, revelation after revelation continue about Downing Street's illicit parties ignoring their own COVID rules. With the inevitably damning Sue Gray Partygate report still to come, I just got to wonder, how much longer can Boris Johnson actually survive? Well, Danny Finkelstein, the Conservative peer and political columnist for the Times newspaper, joins me now. Danny, great to have you. Thank you for coming to the studio. Every time I think that's it for Boris Johnson, he somehow wriggles off the hook. But I have felt for a while that this double whammy of Partygate drip, 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 leading to this Sue Gray report, which we understand was pretty damning, coupled with surging inflation, ought to be, I would think, a tipping point to potentially the end for him.
It's very difficult for him. Let's look at it in the medium term. He's got to fight a general election. You don't win general elections if you're behind on the economy and you're behind on leadership. And when you've also been in power for a long time, that is very challenging for them to win the next general election. So one of the things, obviously, that you can consider doing if you're a political party is trying to shift your leadership approval ratings by changing your leader. The problem is getting from here to there. Political leaders have a lot of support in their parties that prevents them from being removed. They have a sort of loyalty that isn't actually loyalty to them, it's loyalty to the person themselves. People who are in office feel, I'll stay in office if Boris Johnson stays in office. Why would I rock the boat? If I'm the person that rocks the boat, will it really be me that's the beneficiary, right? So there's what you might think of as a market failure in political coups.
Should he have survived Partygate anyway? Well, the moment he admitted that he'd been to some of these parties and that he'd done wrong, should any Prime Minister, once they've been fined by the police, actually survive that moment?
No, not in my opinion, and actually it goes before that. I'm not in favour of the police having intervened, actually, but I am in favour of making the judgment that he shouldn't survive. You can't set rules on something that the government claimed, and I think they were right, I think you agree with this as well, was a matter of life and death, and then feel they shouldn't keep those rules. So I think if you don't think the Prime Minister should resign as a result of that, you're crossing a line. And even if you believe that the issue itself hasn't got proportion, the principle does, which is that Prime Ministers who are lawmakers shouldn't be lawbreakers. But that's a different question than the other question. The question, should he leave, is a different question for will he?
And that's where it gets a bit more complex with Boris Johnson, because take the pandemic, for example. I would argue that the first half of it, he was pretty disastrous. His failure to deal with things properly, quickly enough, I felt led to a lot of unnecessary deaths. Care homes, PPE, testing, the border control, the rest of it. But there's no doubt that he made the right call about vaccines, brought in the right people, and they bought the right number, and that helped us. Also, no doubt that he stood back, I think, eventually and said, right, we have to open up and live with the virus, and that has so far proven to be the right decision. And again, right now with Partygate, you also have Ukraine raging away, where many people consider Boris Johnson, and I would be one of them, and I interviewed Vladimir Klitschko last night, who was very praiseworthy about Boris Johnson's leadership, where he's actually been quite statesmanlike and done what I would want him to do as Prime Minister. So he's a contradictory character, Boris.
My father was born in Lviv, and now Lviv, so it matters a lot to me. And he has shown clear principle, but in other areas, particularly in domestic policy, really, the government seems a bit lost. We've got a Chancellor of the Exchequer who has one fiscal policy, a Prime Minister that has a different fiscal policy. They don't know whether they say they want to cut taxes, but they're actually raising taxes. So the government has a leadership which I don't think has got clarity, and it doesn't have direction. And that definitely will undermine him with Conservative
Can any government and any Prime Minister, and this might apply to Joe Biden as well, by the way, can any of them survive this kind of level of inflation? Is it the ultimate death knell for any serving incumbent Prime Minister or President?
It certainly doesn't matter whether he's to blame for it or not. What matters is the fact that people will feel bad about the cost of living and they'll feel bad about their incomes. It's all about timing.
I mean, Churchill, who's Boris's great hero, he won a war, but so many people were left impoverished at the end of it, he got kicked out of office.
Absolutely, and it's actually quite a good comparison because everyone said Clement Attlee was an incredibly boring individual and therefore couldn't possibly beat the colourful Churchill, but did. Yes,
Is that Keir Starmer?
Well, that's possible. If he, of course, himself survives to the next general election, having taken the risk that he has, putting his career in the hands of Durham police force.
Right, look, you're one of the smartest political thinkers in the country. If you're a betting man, is Boris Johnson still going to be there by Christmas?
I'd bet that he'd be there by Christmas. I wouldn't bet that he'd win the general election.